Hello and welcome. My name is Alan and we are back with more notable names in Jewish American history. Before we get into today's video, just want to go ahead and remind you I've got two ways to donate to the channel. I have a Patreon account which allows monthly, month-to-month donations, and I have a Coffee account which allows the same but also allows you to make single one-time donations. Do not donate if you are in financial straits or a donation would put you there. I'd rather you be able to take care of what you need to take care of first. If you can afford it and you want to donate, thank you. I appreciate it. Because it's just me, myself, and I that do the videos. So, yeah. But, with that said, let's jump into this. Today, we are looking at Abraham Joshua Heschel. This is from Britannica. Born 1907 in Warsaw, modern day Poland, but what was then Russian Empire. Died December 23rd, 1972 in New York City, New York. Was a Jewish theologian, a philosopher, noted for his presentation of the prophetic and mystic aspects of Judaism and for his attempt to construct a modern philosophy of religion on the basis of the ancient and medieval Jewish tradition. For a traditional Jewish education, he went on to higher studies at the University of Berlin and the Hochschule für die Wissenschaft des Judentums. He taught at the latter school at the noted Jüdisches Lehrhaus in Frankfurt am Main, at the Institute of Jewish Studies in Warsaw after being deported from Nazi Germany in 1938. At the Institute for Jewish Learning in London and at the Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati, Ohio, before taking the chair of Professor of Jewish Ethics and Mysticism at Jewish Theological Seminary of America in New York City in 1945, a post he would hold until his death. So yeah, life starts out in Poland, but clearly he goes to Germany, University of Berlin, Frankfurt am Main, but the growing Nazi racism would end up with him being deported, which was actually better than what happened to some Jewish folks, unfortunately. He sought to evoke in 20th century man an inner depth of devotion and spontaneous response that he discerned in traditional Jewish piety. He also emphasized social action as an expression of the ethical concern of the pious man, and was at the forefront of protests and demonstrations in the 1960s and 70s intended to secure equal rights for American blacks and end the U.S. military intervention in Vietnam. So ethical conditions very much a concern for him. Fighting for civil rights, fighting to see an end to the Vietnamese war, American Vietnam War. It's called technically just a intervention because the U.S. doesn't like to see it as a war, but it's a war. just like Iran was a war, Afghanistan, a war, Iraq, both of them, wars, Korea, war. They like to call a lot of them interventions or other names, so they're not technically wars. No, they're wars. Although he came to the English-speaking world relatively late in life, he soon achieved a vivid and moving English prose style. Among his best-known works are The Earth is the Lord's, 1950, Man is Not Alone, A Philosophy of Religion, 1951, The Sabbath, Its Meaning to Modern Man, 1951, Man's Quest for God, Studies in Prayer and Symbolism, 1954, God in Search of Man, A Philosophy of Judaism, 1956, and The Prophets, 1962, originally published in German in 1936. So yeah, writer, theologian, philosopher, teacher, and activist. This is from Stanford University. Abraham Joshua Heschel was a Jewish theologian and philosopher with a social consciousness that led him to participate in the civil rights movement. Considered one of the truly great men of his day and a great prophet by Martin Luther King Jr., he articulated to many Jewish Americans and African Americans the notion that they had a responsibility for each other's liberation and for the plight of all suffering fellow humans around the world. Born in 1907 in Warsaw, Poland, to Rabbi Moshe Mordecai and Rachel Perlo Heschel, he received his PhD from the University of Berlin in 1933, as well as a liberal rabbinic ordination from Hochschule für die Wissenschaft des Judentums, 1934. He then succeeded Martin Buber as the director of the Central Organization for Jewish Adult Education in Frankfurt, Germany, until he was deported by the Nazis in 1938. He taught in Warsaw and London before immigrating to the United States in 1940, and in 1945 became a professor of Jewish ethics and mysticism at New York's Jewish Theological Seminary in America, a post he would hold for the rest of his life. As a theologian deeply interested in studying the relationship between God and humankind, he believed that when one understands the spark of the divine that exists within each person, he or she cannot harbor hatred for fellow human beings. A prolific scholar, he also used his writings to express the social concern. That social concern was an outlet for religious piety in noted works such as Man is Not Alone, A Philosophy of Religion in 1951, and God in Search of Man, A Philosophy of Judaism in 1955. In his opening address at the National Conference on Religion and Race in Chicago on the 14th of January 1963, at which King was also a featured speaker, he maintained that Americans had a chance to find redemption through their efforts to combat racism. Seen in the light of our religious tradition, the Negro problem is God's gift to America, the test of our integrity, a magnificent spiritual opportunity. He also viewed ecumenism as a necessary means to attack this social ill. With clearly the disdain he has for the maltreatment of others, it kind of makes you wonder how he would have felt about what was happening in the newly reformed Israel. Because he went through Nazi Germany, lived through Nazi Germany in its early years. He took part in the civil rights movement, and one of the things he talks about and preaches is kindness and understanding. Once you understand the divine spark of each individual, it's hard to show hate. So yeah, a social consciousness infused with an ecumenical approach brought him and King together again on the 19th of November 1963 when both men addressed the United Synagogue of America's Golden Jubilee Convention in New York. King expressed his deep accord with Heschel's cause, which was to stand against the Soviet Union's treatment of its Jewish population, by restating his own view that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. King stated that he could not neglect the plight of his brothers and sisters who happened to be Jews in Soviet Russia. In March of 1965, Heschel responded to King's call for religious leaders to join the Selma to Montgomery March for voting rights. The march was spiritually fulfilling for Heschel, and he recalled feeling like his legs were praying as he walked next to King. When King delivered his famous address against the Vietnam War at Riverside Church on April the 4th, 1967, Heschel followed him as a speaker and ended his own presentation saying, "I conclude with the words of Dr. King. The great initiative of this war is ours. The initiative to stop it must be ours." He later remarked that King would later remark that Rabbi Heschel is one of the persons who is relevant at all times, always standing with prophetic insights to guide persons with a social consciousness. Both men were driven by the notion of a collaborative responsibility for the fate of all mankind and believed that the struggle to overcome injustice must be ecumenical. So yeah. Again, it makes you wonder. It really intrigues me now, especially with the genocide going on, how he felt about the treatment of Palestinians in a newly formed Israel. We know Albert Einstein, he loved the idea of a newly formed Israel, but he was like, when he saw the way Palestinians were being treated, he spoke out against it. He's like, this should not be what we seek. You know, the betterment of another should not be at the disparagement of others. Warsaw, Poland, New York, New York. married Sylvia Strauss in 1946, and one child they have listed, Susanna Heschel. His father originally hailed from Medzebiz, and his mother from Minsk, Mazowiecki. I probably butchered those names. He was descended from preeminent European rabbis on both sides of the family. Had siblings Sarah, Devorah, Miriam, Esther, Sema, Gittel, and Jacob. Moshe would die of influenza in 1916 when Abraham was only 9. Tutored by Gerer Hasid, who introduced him to the thought of Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Kotsk. Received a traditional yeshiva education and studied for Orthodox rabbinical ordination. Pursued a doctorate at the University of Berlin. Studied under notable scholars including Hanut Alvek, Ismar Edelbegin, Julius Gutmann, Alexander Gutmann, and Leo Black. And his mentor in Berlin was David Koigen. He later taught the Talmud at the Heschel, or Hochschul. Again, I'm more than likely butchering that. I don't speak German. I don't speak the different languages of Jewish peoples, whether it be Hebrew, Yiddish, so on, so on. In October of 1938, while living in a rented room in the home of a Jewish family in Frankfurt, he was arrested by the Gestapo and deported to Poland in the Polanation. Spent 10 months lecturing Jewish philosophy and the Torah at Warsaw's Institute for Jewish Studies. And 6 weeks before the German invasion of Poland, he fled Warsaw for London. So yeah. His sister Esther was killed in the German bombing of Warsaw. His mother would be murdered by Nazis. And his sister Gittel would also die in that incident. And his sister Devorah was deported from Vienna to Auschwitz, where she would perish. He would never return to Germany, Austria, or Poland. If I should go to Poland or Germany, every stone, every tree would remind me of contempt, hatred, murder, of children killed, of mothers burned alive, of human beings asphyxiated. arrived in New York City on March 1940 and soon left for Cincinnati, Ohio to serve on the faculty of the Hebrew Union College, the main seminary of Reform Judaism, for 5 years. In 46, he would return to New York, taking the position in the Jewish Theological Seminary of America, the main seminary of conservative Judaism, and would remain with the Jewish Theological Seminary as professor of Jewish ethics and mysticism until his death in 72. Would marry Sylvia Strauss, a concert pianist, on December the 10th, 46, and their daughter would be Susanna Heschel, who would become a Jewish scholar in her own right. Let's see. More interested in spirituality than in critical text study. The latter was a speciality of many scholars at the Jewish Theological Seminary. He was not given a graduate assistant for many years, and he was mainly relegated to teach in the education school or the rabbinical school, not the academic graduate program. Let's see. Writing about segregation, he said, "Some are guilty, but all are responsible." He worked with African American civil rights and spoke out against the Vietnam War. So, think of what he said there. Some are guilty, but all are responsible. One of the things King often mentioned when he talked about the fight for civil rights, at least the racists in the South were honest. It was the moderate whites who turned out to be the biggest obstacle, biggest stumbling block towards civil rights. Well, can't you go slower? Can't you just accept a little bit at a time? So even though they weren't out there necessarily causing all the negativity and damage done by the out and out racist, they still allowed that kind of behavior to happen by not wanting, actual rights then and there. And yeah, some are guilty, but all are responsible. He also criticized what he specifically called pan-halakhism, or an exclusive focus on religiously compatible behavior to the neglect of the non-legalistic dimension of rabbinic tradition. He is notable as a recent proponent of what one scholar calls Nachmanidean school of Jewish thought, which emphasized the mutuality dependent relationship between God and man, as opposed to Maimonidean school, in which God is independent and unchangeable. In Heschel's language, the Maimonidean perspective is associated with Rabbi Yishmael and the Nachmanidean perspective with Rabbi Akiva. According to him, neither perspective should be adopted in isolation, but rather both are interwoven with the other. He described Kabbalah as an outgrowth of classical rabbinic sources that describe God's dependence on man to implement the divine plan for the world. This contrasts with scholars like Gershon Sholem, who saw Kabbalah as reflecting the influence of non-Jewish thought, while Sholem's school focused on the metaphysics and history of Kabbalistic thought. Heschel focused on Kabbalistic descriptions of the human religious experience. In recent years, a growing body of Kabbalah scholarship has followed Heschel's emphasis on mystical experience of Kabbalah and its continuity with earlier Jewish sources. He was widely read, whose most influential works include Man is Not Alone, God in Search of Man, The Sabbath, and The Prophets. As a representative of American Jews at the Second Vatican Council, he persuaded the Catholic Church to eliminate or modify passages in its liturgy that demeaned Jews or referred to an expected conversion of the Jewish people to Christianity. His theological works argued that religious experience is a fundamentally human impulse, not just a Jewish one. He believed that no religious community could claim a monopoly on religious truth. For these and other reasons, Dr. King called him a truly great prophet. Heschel actively participated in the civil rights movement and was a participant in the Third Selma to Montgomery March, accompanying King and John Lewis. Talk a little bit about each of his writings. Let's see. In his view, prophets do not speak for God so much as they remind their audience of God's voice for the voiceless, the poor, and the oppressed. He writes, prophecy is the voice that God has lent to the silent agony, a voice to the plundered poor, to the profane riches of the world. It is a form of living, a crossing point of God and man. God is raging in the prophet's words. Yes. What else do we have? Received the National Jewish Book Award in 1970 in the Jewish Thought category for Israel, an Echo of Eternity. 5 schools have been named after Heschel. Buenos Aires, Argentina, the Rabbinical School of the Seminario Rabbinico Latinoamericano. the Upper West Side of New York City, the A.J. Heschel School. In California, the Abraham Joshua Heschel Day School in Northridge, while the Heschel West Day School is in Agora Hills, and the Toronto Heschel School in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. In 2009, the Missouri Highway was named Dr. Abraham Joshua Heschel Highway to subvert the plans of a Springfield, Missouri area neo-Nazi group who cleaned the stretch of highway as part of an Adopt a Highway program. His daughter, though, has objected to the adoption of her father's name in this context. His papers are held in the Rubenstein Rare Book and Manuscript Library at Duke University. And on the 17th of October 2022, John Paul II, Catholic University of Lublin, inaugurated the Abraham J. Heschel Center for Catholic Jewish Relations, attended by Catholic and Jewish features, including Rabbi Abraham Skorka, Susanna Heschel, Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem, Archbishop Pier Battista Pizzaballa, and Archbishop Stanislaw Budzik of Lublin. Pope Francis also welcomed the establishment of the Heschel Center. But yeah, again, we don't really get mention of how he saw the struggles in the newly reformed Israel between Palestinians and the Jewish population. But yeah, Jewish people of peace like that, I often want to know how they feel about the treatment of Palestinians, because those who actually have morals and principles, and there are many, they speak out and say what is being done is atrocious and it should not happen. So I'm kind of wondering how he would feel. But anyway, yeah, Abraham Joshua Heschel. We'll go ahead and end that episode there. As always, educate thyself, think, read, study, learn. Someone tells you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources, and it can't be a tinfoil hat wearing sources or a bunch of anecdotes slapped together to try to make sources. I'll be putting my links and sources in the description box below the video. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. Until then, later.